G'day guys, Adam Cogan here from SSW TV, and we are here at the Digital Workplace Conference here in Sydney, and I have Sue Hanley here. How are you, Sue?
Good, how are you?
You are a knowledge management expert, and I know you've had some crazy popular sessions, so I'm very excited to have you. We're going to talk about governance. Is there a better word than governance?
Well, I sometimes call it the G word because
yeah,
there's a lot of sensitivity around that word. So my favorite G word is guidance, because I think at the end of the day that's what SharePoint users really need. Yeah.
It's kind of, isn't it, rules?
I think in general, yeah, there are rules built in, but guidance is basically what people are, I think what users are really looking for in SharePoint solutions is not, rules we're going to build them in, and so we don't want to allow you to make mistakes. Now you got to show me sort of what's the best way to achieve the outcomes I want, because there's so many different ways to do things. I think guidance is probably a friendlier, more approachable term.
So what we're talking about is a company has, say, some type of documented processes, policies or whatever they are, and this knowledge management system should help them. What is the problem? Why did we start noticing that there's a problem and we need to start thinking about governance?
So usually the problem is, let's be more specific than knowledge management and talk about an intranet, because usually that's where the problem comes into play. So we have this great intranet, and when we build it, it's wonderful. And you know, angels are singing and the content is beautiful and everyone's happy and there's a launch event. And over time, because people are busy and even though they know they're supposed to manage their content, the content starts to deteriorate. And our beautiful intranet starts having some issues because content isn't current and no one feels accountable. And where governance comes into play is because if we allow that content to deteriorate, the business results that we were going for with our intranet can't be achieved. And so what we really want to do is figure out not governance for the sake of governance, but governance for the sake of achieving a business outcome and understanding what we want to achieve with that solution and then figuring out what needs to be there from a guidance and a rules and a policy perspective in order to ensure that we get that outcome. And if everyone understands sort of what the outcome is, it's a lot easier to wrap our heads around what the rules are in order to achieve that, because business drives that experience.
Right. So if someone's got an Office 365 site, and I assume the problems are when it's kind of successful, when everyone's going crazy, creating things, doing things, using workarounds and things, are they the problems?
So I think the problem is that what we have when it comes to SharePoint and Office 365 is an unbelievably wonderful tool to allow business users to create websites to solve business problems. And the challenge is that our business users don't necessarily know sort of information architecture best practices, but they probably know how to write documents, but maybe not create content for the web. And I think what people are looking for is a little guidance and help to achieve their outcomes in this kind of unfamiliar place where they're now building information sites or websites, and that's not what they know how to do. They know how to do what, they know how to do HR, they know how to do legal, and now we're empowering them to make these really good solutions, but yet we're not giving them the tools that they need to know how to do it well. So a lot of what governance really is giving people guidance so they can make good choices to get to those outcomes.
So is the guidance documentation, or is it videos, or is it training, or what is the
I think the guidance is everything but documentation, because what I've learned in the last 15 years of trying to build these kind of sites on SharePoint is that people don't read. They just won't read large documents, and if they do, they're reading them before bed and they're putting them to sleep. So it's really hard to consume and apply information from a large document. So what I'd like to see more of is governance represented in short chunks of information that we present on a web page so that we can connect the information in all the really cool dynamic ways that we can do on the web that we can't do in a document. And when that content has an asset, we can also create an asset to go with written content that is delivered in video. We can sort of have web pages that have a small amount of text and a video that supplements, complements, or duplicates what's in the text, so that we can basically now create this consumable information that allows people to learn that guidance in whatever way works for them. If I'm a video-based, if I'm an auditory learner, I can watch the video. If I prefer to read, I can read the content, as long as it's written for the web, so it's scannable with short text, no complete sentences. We want to write tomes. We want to give people enough information so that they can go out and build their beautiful sites.
So clearly, creating all this training, and obviously you want the training to be read and you want the videos to be watched, and how do you make it so it's not too painful? Like painful for the consumer, painful for the company if they use workarounds. Like, how do you reduce some of the pain?
Well, I think you have to think about the main event, which is like making sure that you're trying to chunk the content to be as topical as possible. So you don't want to put too much content in an individual asset, because what will happen then is you'll have to be doing a lot of updating. So if you can make the content as small, like one topic per page, then when something changes, you'll have fewer things to update.
You've talked about reducing the sharp edges.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You got some real examples of where you've reduced those sharp edges?
Yeah, so I think what we had been talking about is that I think there's a way of thinking about governance in 3 words: no sharp edges. And the idea is not to allow people to make mistakes, by giving them enough guidance so that that the information doesn't get hurt, that the organization doesn't get hurt, we achieve our outcome objectives. So for example, the classic one in SharePoint that causes a lot of pain in the organization is document naming. And so one of the biggest pain points I see is a disease that actually I find in most organizations, and I call that disease versionitis. And that happens when people put .v1, .v2, .final, .really final, .this time I mean it. It's the last version of the document. And what happens when and then we email those documents around. And now I get a document that says .v3, and I don't even know if there's a .v4 or a .final or a .final. And so what we're trying to do is give people guidance about how can we avoid that versionitis disease. So one thing we can do is provide some guidance that says don't put version numbers in your document names, in your file names. We have this great tool, it's called SharePoint. It does versioning automatically, so we don't need to do that. And instead of naming with version items, with version numbers, name your document with words that make sense, store it in your SharePoint doc lib, send people links, not attachments, and that way, no matter when I get that link, it's always the most current version of that document.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think I agree with that one, that's for sure. What companies do you go and visit that get the most value? And I'm talking size of companies. If they're 20 employees, will they get value out of thinking about some of your systems on governance? Or are we, where's your sweet spot? 1,000 employees, 10,000 employees?
I almost don't think it matters. At the end of the day, if you're going to use SharePoint or Office 365 to solve a business problem, what you don't want is a solution that doesn't make sense for the organization and that people can't understand how to use. So whether you're 20 people, 20,000 or 200,000 people, people still need training and guidance for how to use tools effectively. And maybe the governance collection of assets wouldn't be as large in a 20-person company, but you still have to think about what are the problems we're trying to solve and what guidance do we need to give people in order to ensure that we continuously solve that problem.
So I want to ask you about the content that people should create, but before I do that, let's just say you've got a boss who's not convinced that there's a problem or he'll get value out of this process. This process costs money. How do you, I don't know, do you have any good points on saying where the value comes from? What value are you giving?
Well, the value comes from achieving business results.
Yes.
So you can basically look through your current content and see how much of it is old and stale, and think about that. We have this great search engine in Office 365, and if I'm finding a bunch of crap, that's wasting my time, because now I have to dig through or sift through that crap in order to find the nugget of gold in this huge collection that gets returned. That's a real loss in productivity.
One of the things we did, Sue, is on all the pages, we put a button there that says this is out of date. So all they had to do was click it. And so we got more of it that was out of date. It's still very hard to say, hey, this is what we had. We've cleaned it up a bit, and now this is healthier. It's hard to get those actual meaningful stats.
Yeah, although I think that's really why we need to establish some roles and responsibilities in this whole governance framework. If someone is responsible for content and we build that responsibility into their job description or into their performance goals, they're far more likely to care about getting it done. So if it's important to the organization that we have great quality content so that people can find what they need to get their jobs done more effectively, then we should build that into someone's job responsibilities. And when you measure someone against that, their goals, we tend to get things done. And so I think that's really part of all this, says if we care enough to have a governance plan, that we have to care enough to make it someone's job. Right. Someone's job.
Okay, so Sue, I'm sold. I'm going to go ahead. What questions do I ask and who do I ask? Like, do I pull all the employees in? Do I pull in the managers? And what questions do I ask them?
So that's a great question, actually. In fact, I think a lot of people, they say to me, gee, if I only knew what questions to ask, what could be governed, I'd be able to do this. So I've been doing this for a really long time, and I've collected and keep up to date all the questions you need to think about. And you know, this Office 365 thing, it changes all the time. So the questions that you need to ask change as we add new services and as we add new capabilities within those services. So I have this list of about 125 or so questions that I keep up to date. It's on my website. Anyone can go grab the questions. I use it in my consulting practice, but I also share it with people because, I mean, I know this is a problem that I think lots of people have. So that's where you would find the questions to ask. And part of what I recommend in terms of how do I work through all these questions is creating a small core team of people who are essentially your governance core team, and getting that team together over a series of about 4 weeks or so to focus on one topic at a time. And I've organized the questions by topic. And so the core team gets together, they work through the questions. Sometimes that core team needs some friends, because when you're talking about elements of the user profile, for example, want to make sure we bring in someone from HR and someone from legal, because when you start sort of exposing attributes like birthday, which can be very controversial in some countries. Can you even show that attribute with an expectation that people fill it in when that's considered personal information? So if you've got operations in France and Germany, you really do need to ask that question. Can we show this field? Even if it's not required, is it okay?
Right, okay. So, all right, I'll put the link to your website to see all the questions, but can you just give me a few popular questions?
So I'll tell you the question that tends to draw the most commentary, and that is, do we allow users to upload their own picture to their profile? And what picture should it be? So think about this one. So I work.
Why don't you just use the LinkedIn picture?
Well, soon you will be able to do that.
Good point, yes.
Right? So right now, that's not exactly how it works. So what happens in many, many organizations, that photo in your ID, in your user profile, has to be your badge photo. Now, let's just think about this. People have been at the company for a really long time. They don't look like their badge photo anymore. And people rarely get that taken again. And it's kind of like your driver's license photo. Almost no one looks good in that photo. And so those organizations should really ask, can people upload their own picture? And then people will say things like, well, you know, if people can upload their own picture, they're going to upload pictures and they won't be dressed appropriately, or it'll be a picture of their whole family. And so do we need, you know, can we allow it? What should, you know, what kind of guidance do we need? And it's actually interesting that you brought up LinkedIn. The best guidance I've ever heard was from a woman who ran a federal agency in the US, and she said, look, anyone can upload any picture they want, but they should think about this. Is this picture appropriate for LinkedIn? And that was the end of it.
Interesting. My little girls are on Facebook all the time, and I happen to have LinkedIn open. And my little one made a comment about the site, even though she'd never seen it. And just something about it being old. For old people, it's very, how would you know? And I said, but aren't these the same people on, you see on Facebook as well? They're all the same people. And she goes, but they never use their, everybody's serious. There's no quirky photos. And I didn't understand what she meant by that, but on Facebook they use weird photos sometimes where it's not their picture, but they never do that on LinkedIn.
Right. Well, actually, the guidance on LinkedIn actually is you should use a professional photo that looks like how you want to be represented in your career. So I hope there's no Simpsonized photos on LinkedIn.
So, all right. So we've got the right questions.
Yep.
Where do we build this site? Do you let's just talk. I know you could do it in Confluence or many other tools. We do it on our Sugar Learning site, but if you're doing it on SharePoint or Office 365, you could use a wiki, you could use lists, libraries. How do you recommend doing it?
So now I actually think it's a great way to step your way into the new communications site.
Sweet.
Yeah, because the comm site, even if you've got a very strictly branded intranet and you're using classic publishing pages, the help site, which is essentially what we're building, your guidance and training site, could be something different. So it's a great way to step your way into those beautiful modern pages that are, responsive out of the gate. They work really well on your phone, on your iPad, on your whatever size device you have. They're image heavy, so they really allow you this opportunity to tell stories, to tell really meaningful, image-rich stories that ideally, if the story is really good, people will read the story, consume the content, and follow the practice. And so I think my first choice today, if you're in Office 365, is to dip your toe in the water with a communication site and start with your governance and training site. Right.
Well, I didn't expect that answer, but I'm really happy. We've just been playing with communication sites and done our new version of our intranet on it. Is there any third parties for communication sites yet, or it's way too early?
I think right now it's a little bit early. I think we'll probably see some third-party web parts to fill in sort of what may not be available yet on communication sites. But it's interesting, that it's changing. What you can do on the comm site has been changing even since it was announced back in May. New web parts have been added and new capabilities, and so I think we're going to see some more investment from Microsoft.
And it's very easy to extend it. They've already given us the extension point, so you can. So
yeah, you should see what we're doing on one of my projects. It's like our developer teams, who are unbelievably brilliant, have built some amazing web parts to fill in some of the gaps.
Okay, so you've asked the right questions, you've developed the right content, they've gone ahead and completed the content. What happens from there? Do you just give them permissions? Or do you give them a virtual license?
All right, so
or in our case, with Sugar Learning, we just did a gamification system. So basically, they got points for completing bits and pieces. How do you do it?
So you could do something like that. I usually see people doing gamification to help ensure that people complete their profile, their user profile.
Right.
So that's one thing you can do. But the idea is now we've created a destination site for learning and guidance in how to use SharePoint and Office 365 and all of the family of products most effectively. And the idea is we now have to deliver that to the user when they are actually ready to learn about what they need to do. Ideally, that would be in context. So when should you teach someone about file naming conventions? When they're about to upload a document. And so there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can look at some of the third-party tools like Visual SP and Content Panda that provide sort of in-context learning. I think
But they're not going to work with communication sites, right?
Not yet, but I also think Microsoft is going to, at some point, create those endpoints in context, because that's really how people learn. We're not going to send people to 4-day SharePoint classes. Right. Not everybody. There'll be core people that will need that level of training, but for most users, you want to give them the information they need, that video that tells them how to do it, the 2-minute tech tip, if you will, right when they're about to do it. That's when they're the most receptive to learning the information. So I think what I'm looking for is those endpoints where I can stick that in at those right junction points in the communication site.
Well, Sue, it's been awesome talking to you, and I think you've made the word governance less scary. Maybe so people watch it, we don't put the governance word on. We'll just put improving the
G word.
The G word, improving your knowledge management systems or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So I can't wait to catch up with you next time. Great. And this is Adam Cogan signing off for SSW TV at the Digital Workplace Conference in Sydney.